see somebody get murdered who is gainfully employed, who is married, who has a small child in the middle of the night in her own home just does not happen all that often.
That it was a target killing. You could see a massive amount of blood. It looked to me like it was somebody that was very, very angry with her.
It was a very frustrating case. You got people barking in your ears telling you who committed it.
Did he do it? Did he not do it? The husband always remained a suspect.
I thought, what the hell am I going to do for the rest of my life without her?
ब-मודסטो, 90 miles east of San Francisco. Originally a stop on the Sacramento-LA Railroad. True to its name, a modest city of 200,000, surrounded by some of the nation's richest farmland.
This is a very nice middle-class income area, very tranquil.
The Bay Area of Modesto is home to hard-working people chasing the American dream. In 1988, it's also the setting for an American nightmare.
It's just not that common. In our city, where someone is brutally murdered in the middle of the night, it just doesn't happen that often.
I just came in. There's blood everywhere. There's a knife laid in the floor. I think my wife is dead. God, hurry, please.
Yeah, I want you to stay on the phone with me, okay?
A man makes a frantic 911 call. The dispatcher mistakenly thinks someone has collapsed and sends firefighters and paramedics to the scene. Fireman Tom Brennan is on duty that night.
When we arrived at the area, we stopped just short of the house, and a gentleman was in the front driveway and moving towards the engine. He was very upset. He was not focused. His eyes were, obviously darting around.
The man is Harold Whitlock. He says his wife Debbie is not breathing.
When I first entered the house and rounded through the kitchen and went to the hallway where my crew members were, here is a body laying somewhat spread eagle down the hallway with a knife between her legs, and her nightgown or shirt was completely up over her face. And it's shocking. My crew had already determined that she had no pulse and was cold.
Just a few feet away, a startling discovery.
In opening the second bedroom door down the hall is when I found the daughter. Much to my surprise, without even being in shock or afraid. And all her comment was that, "That's my mommy out there." And I said, "What do you mean your mommy out there?" She goes, "She's fixing me breakfast." So she had no idea, or did not express at that time, that her mother had been harmed in any way, let alone, brutally murdered.
The child is 3-year-old Courtney Whitlock.
She allowed me to pick her up. She brought her stuffed animal with her, put a blanket around her and over her, and carry her right out through, over the scene, out the front, over to the paramedic crew.
Detectives Bill Grogan and Dick Ridenhour are on the scene minutes later.
I was one of the first detectives to arrive. I walked in the house, and the ambulance crew were there. It was obviously a homicide. It was a very bloody scene. Her head was covered with bedding. It was very bloody.
Her legs were spread out, 1 foot touching each side of the hallway. You could see a massive amount of blood. I could see that she'd nearly had her head cut off.
The bedroom was extremely bloody. The walls had blood like you would take a squirt gun and just shoot it against the wall. It would hit and just run down at the bottom.
Investigators begin combing the house for clues. Blood splatter in the bedroom suggests Debbie was attacked here first. They also suspect she might have been sexually assaulted.
Problem started in the bedroom, and basically because of the amount of blood that was in there, that it was on the dresser drawers, and it was on the bed, and it was all on the wall. So it appeared that there had been some kind of a struggle inside that room originally. And then she was brought from the bedroom out into the hallway.
She had severe laceration to the nose. The nose was almost severed. Her hands had defensive wounds, like she was putting up a struggle for a while.
News of Debbie's savage murder reaches her British-born mother, Jackie, and stepfather, Dennis, in Minnesota.
Dennis got the phone call, and then he walked into the family room looking so strange. And he said, "It's Debbie." And I thought, oh, dear God, has she been in an accident? He said, someone cut her throat. And I went into total shock, walked out, and he found me walking up and down the middle of the street. It was like a nightmare. You know, it's so surreal. It's like you're sitting there and all this stuff is happening, but you're observing. You're not really living it. And then the next day, I realized it wasn't a dream. Debbie was actually dead. And life changed forever.
When I saw this, I believed that it was a target killing, just by the way he had displayed the body and by the violent way that she had been killed. It looked to me like it was somebody that was very, very angry with her. And that would lead me to believe that it was somebody who knew her.
Detective Ridenauer and Grogan turned to the person who knew Debbie best, her husband.
When I spoke to Harold for the first time, he seemed really upset. He was bloody, he had blood on his hands, and he explained to me that when he first arrived, he touched his wife, Deborah. That's how he got the blood on his hands.
After the party,
Harold claims he was out all night at a bachelor party. Returning home in the early hours, he discovered his wife in a pool of blood.
Red flags sort of came up. An all-night bachelor party during the middle of the week isn't really something that occurs all the time.
It's 5:30 in the morning. He supposedly was here, or we assumed he was there. And so this is not fitting in a nice straight line.
Debbie and Harold had been married for 5 years. They met at a Sears department store.
She wanted to be the first female manager of Sears. She had worked in Sears since she was in high school. She was their youngest department manager. I mean, she was a go-getter.
Both were on the rebound from failed marriages. Harold already had a child, Angela, with his first wife. The relationship blossomed, and in 1983, Debbie and Harold married. A year later, daughter Courtney was born.
My father had an ability to make tender-hearted women fall in love with his potential. Once Dad got into a marriage, he wasn't really sure how to make that work. And he was a terrific friend and a not-so-hot husband.
She was one of those girls that just worked. She was a workaholic until they had a child. And then, sadly, like a lot of times, when one is working out of town sometimes and you don't see each other a lot, their marriage sort of grew apart.
Nothing at the crime scene suggests a break-in. Debbie's keys and purse are the only things missing.
We looked the entire house over. The house was not ransacked. We couldn't see anything that was out of place. Nothing was gone through, nothing was thrown around.
We're looking at every little speck of anything you could find. We're taking drains apart. We're looking for blood on anything.
Crime scene investigators discover a partial handprint in the kitchen and a knife in the sink.
We found several drops of blood in the kitchen near the sink, thinking the person that did the killing may have washed up in the sink.
The patio door was open. The drapes was pulled just a short distance apart. That's where we found the one spot of blood.
A blood sample is sent to the lab for analysis.
I knew that would be the one thing that would tie the responsible back into this case at some point.
Experience tells investigators they may not have far to go to find their killer.
To see somebody get murdered who is gainfully employed, who is married, who has a small child in the middle of the night in her own home just does not happen all that often. So you had to think this was in some way, shape, or form involved in the murder was centered around the marriage.
All fingers are pointing toward the murdered woman's husband, Harold Whitlock. But do investigators have the evidence to prove it? In Modesto, California, Debbie Whitlock has been brutally murdered while her baby daughter slept in the bedroom next door. Local reporter Daryl Farnsworth covers the story.
It was a big case. Everybody was concerned and wanting to know every day what was going on with the Debbie Whitlock homicide.
This was a brutal event that happened. The whole community was a little uncomfortable.
I got a call from the group manager who informed me that she had been murdered.
Don Bergman was Debbie's boss at Sears department store.
She was a fantastic hard worker. She was very dedicated. She was there at all hours, and everybody liked her. First thing I thought was that her husband had killed her. I called a meeting of all the staff and informed them of the situation and told security to up security because if they saw him come in, I wanted to know immediately.
It's not just Don Bergman who thinks Harold is the killer. Police bring their prime suspect in for questioning, and he drops a bombshell.
After talking to Harold in length, we finally got him to tell us that he was not only at a bachelor's party. He had a girlfriend, and he spent the entire evening with his girlfriend after leaving the bachelor party shortly before midnight, 1 o'clock.
Why did Harold change his story? Investigators check Whitlock's clothes and body for telltale signs of a struggle.
We swabbed his hands, had him checked for any physical injuries. We took all of his clothing to have it examined to see if there were any foreign objects, trace evidence that we could put him at the scene. We know he was there. We know there was blood on his clothing, his hands. We found blood on a ring, but we wanted to make sure we had every base covered.
There was fear. You know, a housewife murdered in her home in the middle of the night and her daughter in the next room. It was a real whodunit.
Officers fan out across the neighborhood, searching for clues.
I walked all of the adjacent blocks to where this homicide occurred. I knocked on every door. I interviewed every resident in that area, and none of them had seen or heard anything suspicious.
We were hoping to locate the purse fingerprints. We were hoping her credit cards would be used to give us something to go on.
The search comes up empty. Detectives look closer at their main suspect, Harold Whitlock, and his troubled marriage to Debbie.
After work, they would go across the street to a Mexican restaurant and bar. They would drink, kind of wind down. People would start flirting, so it added a lot of people now into the relationship. It's not just one happy couple. This is kind of a couple that would party, get a little loose because of alcohol.
Alcohol, it seems, was becoming a problem for Harold. That's when cracks began appearing in the marriage.
There was a history of alcoholism in my father's family. It's very hard to be married to a practicing alcoholic.
I sort of had a feeling that things weren't as well as they should have been with Debbie and Harold, because we were visiting once and I heard him berating her at night.
Talking to Debbie's friends and colleagues, police learned that Harold had a dark side and was often threatening his wife.
It's my daughter, that's it.
Debbie had told me that he had a temper and that he was violent at times with her, that they had gotten into many fights.
Debbie was fearful of Harold. Harold referred to friends about his wife as the bitch. Harold had threatened to kill her. You know, I'll kill you if you ever try to take Courtney away from me.
Normally there's a relationship between the victim and a suspect. Whether that relationship is marriage that's gone sour, whether it's a heat of passion. I was never convinced that the husband wasn't a suspect. None of us were.
A week after the murder, Debbie Whitlock is buried.
When we got to the cemetery and they gave me that little box with her ashes, that's when it hit me, and I saw her name. And I looked at the sky, and forgive me, I thought, what the hell am I going to do for the rest of my life without her?
As Debbie's mother grieves, the police are piecing together the last hours of her life. The night before Debbie was killed, her stepdaughter Angela came over to the house before heading on vacation.
I was the last person to see my stepmother alive.
She was at the residence 11 p.m.
My best friend and I went over to the house to borrow a suitcase. Debbie seemed to be in fine spirits, and we chit-chatted about when she would pick me up at the end of the week.
But more questioning by police reveals something curious.
My baby sister was asleep in the back bedroom, and I wanted to give her a kiss before I left for spring break. So I told Debbie I was gonna head back there, and Debbie said, that's fine, but just be quiet because your father's asleep in the master bedroom. And I went back to the back of the house. I heard my father breathing in the master bedroom.
So we got this one mystery person that supposedly is in the bedroom because Debbie does not want Angela to go into the bedroom. So at the time we're thinking, does she have a boyfriend?
Who was the mysterious man in the bedroom? Detectives delve deeper into Debbie's tangled private life, and they turn up an explosive secret.
And talking to the employees and her best friend, we came up with Debbie's having an affair with her boss, Don Bergman. Don was kind of an embarrassed, hard person to get to tell us a whole lot.
We were very close. Well, we were lovers, and my feeling for her was strong, and her feeling for me was strong. We had talked about her getting a divorce and us getting together. She was fearful at the timing, and especially for her daughter.
Don Bergman has no alibi. He claims he was home alone on the night of the murder.
They told me I was a person of interest. They asked me if I would be willing to take a DNA sample.
Police have another reason to suspect him. Prior to her murder, Debbie and Harold had been receiving crank calls.
Harold told us that someone was calling and hanging up. There's no way of tracing back who was this person. Was it another boyfriend that was calling? We didn't know.
Police have two men in the frame for Debbie's murder. Her husband, and now her boyfriend.
The victim's boyfriend was considered a suspect. The victim's husband was considered the suspect. There were more than one suspect.
A week after Debbie Whitlock was horrifically murdered in her Modesto home, detectives discover that her husband Harold wasn't the only one having an affair. Debbie and her boss were having one too. Both men are considered prime suspects. Detective Ray Taylor scrutinizes Harold's movements the night his wife died.
There was an issue of his story which did not make sense to a lot of people. He organized this party last minute the night before at work, got all of his coworkers to go to a restaurant and celebrate a marriage of a coworker. So that was a little strange.
Witnesses tell the police that Harold flew into a rage after an argument with a coworker at the party.
He left that party angry. Squealed his tires, leaving in a hurry. There was a break in his alibi because the time that the party broke up and the time that he arrived at his girlfriend's house, it could have been anywhere from 15 to 45 minutes.
That left enough of a gap that caused us some great concerns. And whenever you're told a story that someone is proven to lie or be untruthful, obviously the meter tends to go up on whether or not the whole story is made up. So we were quite suspicious of his timeline and his story from the beginning.
Investigators believe Debbie was killed between 12 and 1 a.m.
At the time of the murder, I think he's completely off the radar. And there were conflicting stories about where he was. He said he had stopped at a stop sign for a while. Then he said he had gone to a park for a while. Detectives felt strongly that he would have had time to go home and kill his wife.
All the evidence pointed towards him. Being the husband, being gone at the time of the murder, coming home and finding Debbie's body. Everybody thought he had done it.
This was not a very happy family. Both were taking initial steps to end the relationship, end the marriage.
The detectives learned that the couple had fought bitterly over the custody of their baby daughter.
Their impending divorce was not amicable. It was mutual. They both wanted out of the relationship, but it was not an amicable divorce. These are all indications that, violence could be a real potential in that relationship.
The police put their prime suspects through a lie detector test. Did Harold Whitlock kill his wife? He had opportunity and ample motive. Or did Debbie's lover, Don Bergman, kill her in a jealous rage? He also has no alibi.
Never had done one before. You wonder if you're gonna get so nervous that you're gonna set off that needle and they're gonna say, he's guilty, throw him in jail. So I'm going, oh my God, what's going to happen?
The polygraph examinations conducted in this case, it showed mixed results for the husband. It showed positive results for the victim's boyfriend, that he was not involved.
Results from the forensic test come in as well.
Then all of a sudden you find out that the fingerprint doesn't belong to the suspects. It belongs to one of the guys that was in the house. on the investigation side. That's a pretty good letdown, really.
Lab analysis reveals that neither suspect's blood matches the drops found at the scene. The victim's lover, Don Bergman, is no longer a serious suspect. However, despite the lack of forensic evidence, Debbie's husband, Harold, remains at the top of the suspect list.
It was a very frustrating case. The times were very trying. You got people barking in your ears telling you who committed it. Why aren't you arresting the husband?
I think the case definitely lacked enough evidence to charge, but there was enough red flags, if you will. There was enough suspicion centered around him that caused us to always think, you know, did he do it? Did he not do it? We just could never rule him completely out.
But Debbie's mother, Jackie, does. She grows tired of investigators focusing on her son-in-law, Harold, and in desperation launches her own media campaign. She's hoping someone with information about her daughter's murder will come forward.
My attitude in life was I don't care how I feel. I don't care how much pain I have. I can have a breakdown when it's over. The only important thing in my life was keeping her face out there so somebody eventually would come forward.
Jackie was quite a force in the community. She knew what she wanted to do, and she was doing it. She was contacting whoever she could. She'd call the police every day. She'd call me several times a week.
What Jackie didn't know was that investigators are working on another theory. Autopsy results kept from the family suggest Debbie was raped after she was murdered. That prompts the police to look at suspects with a history of sexual violence.
Every sex registrant in several counties around, their blood type was examined, compared with what we had. Every person that had any like homicide, sexual involved in nature, was compared to this case.
This was a very violent, very sexual type of crime that occurred, the worst kind that a parent can imagine.
A new suspect enters the frame. One of Debbie's co-workers tips off the police that Debbie's first husband, Chuck Peters, was a sadistic bully.
Her husband had actually held her down and started choking her and had a gun to her forehead and held her there until his rage subsided and he finally let her go. But I heard from one of Debbie's friends that she had bruises evident on her neck. And that stayed with some of Debbie's friends, so that when she did end up dying and her throat had been cut, you know, they remembered the bruising to her throat. They remembered that he had played on her fear of having her neck touched or harmed. And it made sense in that desperate moment to assume that he was the killer.
We exhausted family members, close friends, boyfriends, girlfriends, every person connected with the Whitlocks. We came up completely empty. It was a dead end.
But further investigation reveals Debbie's ex has a solid alibi. He's ruled out. 9 weeks after Debbie's death, her mother makes a heartfelt plea to the killer via a Modesto newspaper.
I thought, I need to speak to him directly. So I wrote a letter to her killer. I told him he wouldn't find any peace unless he came forward.
I'm Jackie McDonald, and welcome to The Victim's Voice. And as you can
Jackie ramps up her media blitz. She even starts her own cable show, Victim's Voice.
I directed my anger by doing all these things, keeping her face out there, because the police told me nobody knows, and I knew one person knew. So I thought, if I keep my voice and my face out there long enough, they'll get sick of hearing my voice and seeing my face, and maybe they'll come forward.
Months pass and still no arrests.
No one had information in the crime. Nobody was talking. No one. Jackie was getting frustrated. She was putting so much pressure on the department, the chief, anyone that would listen to her, but nothing was coming of her cries for help. I felt terrible.
Many in Modesto still think Debbie's husband is the killer.
Suspicion turned to anger. He lost friends. He was whispered about in grocery stores that he walked through, in restaurants. He was kind of walking around in a fog for part of that time.
To escape the spotlight, Harold Whitlock moves to Idaho with his girlfriend and young daughter, Courtney. 18 months go by, and the police are feeling the heat. The top brass decide the investigation needs new blood, and Detective Ray Taylor is handed the case.
The victim was sexually assaulted in this case, and we did have a rape analysis kit. It's samplings of hair and tissue, semen, fingernail scrapings from the victim that had not been analyzed.
With new advances in forensic testing now available, the original evidence is sent to a specialist lab in San Francisco.
They were able to get enough semen to do what's called DQ alpha testing. DQ alpha is one gene that is a dominant type of gene that shows up more easily in testing than a lot of the genes. The test for DQ alpha was developed between the time that this homicide occurred and the time that I got this case for investigation.
While he waits for the DNA results, Detective Taylor looks again at the crime scene. With no physical evidence to link Harold to the murder, he comes up with a new theory.
You had to wonder, well, if he didn't have anything to do with it, perhaps it was a murder for hire.
Did he do it? Did he not do it? Did he have it done by somebody else? Did he arrange for it to happen?
The investigation into the murder of Debbie Whitlock is set to take an extraordinary twist. Almost 2 years have passed since a young mother was butchered in her bedroom while her toddler slept nearby. There's a new detective on the case with a sensational new theory. Did Harold Whitlock pay a hitman to kill his wife? Detective Ray Taylor checks the couple's bank statements for clues.
Just the financial records alone required 7 search warrants. Make sure that no large sums of money had been moved, that somebody was not paying somebody else in cash or smaller amounts of cash to, for instance, commit this homicide.
Taylor draws a blank on the accounts. Still suspicious of Harold, he looks again at footage of the crime scene.
It was very suspicious when I reviewed the video of the crime scene and saw in the hallway bathroom that there were no towels on any of the racks or on the counters in the bathroom. There were no towels in that bathroom at all. This bathroom was between the victim's position as she was found and the exit of the house.
In the original search, officers remember seeing towels in Harold's truck, but they were taken in for testing.
Were these towels taken from the hallway bathroom and used to clean himself before he came home that morning? You know, it was all reason to look at him and all reasons to get the evidence and the DNA to eliminate him as a suspect.
Meanwhile, Harold and his daughter Courtney travel back to Modesto from Idaho for a visit with Jackie. The detective uses the opportunity to grill Debbie's husband once again.
A detective showed up, trying in one last desperate attempt to prove that my dad had killed Debbie.
He expressed his grief He expressed his anger in a different way than almost anybody I've ever been in contact with. In talking with the psychologist that I had watching this interview, he indicated that there was no doubt in his mind that Harold was showing signs of deception. So it made me wonder always if there was something else that he was not sharing.
Results from the new DNA test come back, and it's a negative. There is no genetic match between Harold and the murder scene. Though suspicions linger, Harold is no longer a prime suspect.
I don't think the case ever really dropped off in public interest. This was an unclosed case that the whole community wanted to know. And every year we would do a story that would get everybody going again. And everybody, oh yeah, the Whitlock murder, they got to solve that one.
Years pass and the case goes cold. But Jackie McDonald never gives up on her quest to find her daughter's killer.
You would think up ideas of where can I put her face. That's all I thought about. And I thought, billboards at the side of the road, and I didn't see victims. So I started calling billboard companies. And then, of course, from the billboards, one day Pizza Hut came to the house. And I thought, everybody has pizza. So I contacted headquarters, and they even supplied the flyers. And they put her flyers all the way from Merced all the way through to Modesto.
Jackie wasn't about to forget about her daughter's memory. She wasn't about to forget about the loss of her daughter, and she wasn't about to let us, not be held accountable.
Jackie gets the case featured on the TV crime show, America's Most Wanted.
We had about 400 leads just from that one night, that one presentation that came in. Half of those were discounted because they were simply opinion. You got to look at the husband, or, you've got to look at the girlfriend. But there were probably another 50 viable leads that we actually had to do follow-up on.
If I keep my voice and my face out there long enough, they'll get sick of hearing my voice and seeing my face, and maybe they'll come forward.
It's now 8 years since the homicide. On the dark streets of a rough part of town, Officer Ed Steele is on patrol. The all-but-dormant case is about to blow wide open.
It was November 1996. I was assigned to patrol. I was on graveyard, and those hours basically run from 10 o'clock at night till 7 o'clock the next morning.
It's 2 a.m., and he spots former felon Michael Warnell.
Since he was a previously documented burglar, I stopped him just to see if he was up to no good. And I'll never forget the conversation we had. I stopped him and said, "Is everything okay? Are you doing anything you're not supposed to be?" And he said, "No."
Steele.
He just made a spontaneous statement to me that we should get together and talk about something he knew. So I asked him, "Michael, what are you talking about?" So he ended up telling me that he had information about an unsolved homicide.
It's Debbie Whitlock's murder.
Michael had told me at the time that he waited so long to talk to law enforcement, in part because he was heavily involved in crime himself. He told me that he had seen the signs, the billboards, and it reminded him. But he said there was one billboard in particular that he passed quite frequently, and it constantly reminded him of the information that he had that, in reality, no one else ever had.
Michael Warnell tells Officer Steele an incredible story. 8 years earlier, he was a drug dealer. At 3 a.m. on the night of the murder, he had an unexpected visitor.
According to Michael, he was in his garage cutting up marijuana for sale when someone began pounding on his door. He saw that it was Scott, which was a neighbor of his. Scott was very highly agitated, sweaty, very upset, very anxious, and started rattling on about how he thinks that he had just killed a woman.
I know who killed her.
We drove around the area of northwest Modesto where he pointed out where he thought the murder might have occurred and where he used to live.
Michael has information that only the person that was there, that committed the crime, or was told of the crime would know.
Finally, the Modesto police have a serious lead. But after all these years, can the mysterious Scott be tracked down? Modesto police have received a tip about a new suspect in the Debbie Whitlock murder. They're now on the hunt for a man known only as Scott. Is he the man that carried out this brutal killing?
I'm not getting anywhere. I'm not finding anybody named Scott that lives at that address. Talking to neighbors, I was able to pinpoint a residence 2 doors down that Scott eventually lived at that residence. I got a picture of Scott, put it in a lineup. Michael identified Scott as the person he knew.
You sure? That's the guy.
It took probably 3-4 months to finally find where Scott lived and then to trace him from Rumble Road to Flippin, Arkansas.
Detectives learned that his full name is Scott Fizzell. He has no known connection to the dead woman. But suspiciously, soon after the homicide, he left Modesto and moved to Flippin, Arkansas, 2,000 miles away. Through his social security number, Detective Grogan traces him to a local boat factory.
Ranger Boats pretty much keeps the whole town going, and that's where everybody works. And that's where I found him working.
Fizzell was a big guy. My recollection, he was well in excess of 275, 290 pounds. He was a big man, probably 6'2" or even larger, as I recall. He could be intimidating.
I walked in and I introduced myself to Scott. He sort of fell back in his chair, put his head down, and just his body language, I knew Scott was guilty. That there was no doubt in my mind Scott was the person I've been looking for 8 years.
But Fizzell isn't about to confess to the murder.
His admission to me that he was on dope, he was young, he was stupid. Scott Fizzell, he didn't tell anybody about this case except for Michael. His current girlfriend that he was living with, she knew nothing about it. He had a different life. His family knew nothing about it. They were shocked. They knew nothing about it.
The police are convinced Fizzell murdered Debbie Whitlock. He is printed, photographed, and his blood taken. He's then extradited to California.
I got a phone call in the morning from the chief of police saying, "Don't tell anybody, Jackie, but they have gone to arrest somebody."
Big news. Finally, after 9 years, they've got a suspect in the homicide of Debbie Whitlock. We learned right off the bat that he was formerly from Modesto, and that he had moved out of town not long after the homicide.
In the years since the murder, forensic science has taken huge strides, allowing police to link Fizzell's blood and semen to the crime. For Jackie McDonald, Fizzell's arrest brings joy and horror. For the first time, she learns her daughter was also raped.
I felt so numb. You know, that's something else to go in my mind that I have to think about when I think about her murder. And I do relive it.
On January 24th, 1997, Scott Fizzell pleads not guilty. But police and prosecution now believe they have a clear picture of what happened on March 25th, 1988. After her husband went out for the night, Debbie left the patio door unlocked. At around 12:45 a.m., Scott Fizzell went looking for an easy house to rob and found hers. Debbie must have heard him in the kitchen. Fizzell, high on crystal meth, snapped. Grabbing a knife from the kitchen, he stabbed her in the neck. Fizell dragged her lifeless body into the hallway and raped her. The police never do learn who the mystery man Debbie's stepdaughter heard snoring in the bedroom earlier that night was. But they're now sure he wasn't the killer.
I believe she died silently because Courtney didn't wake up. And they were in the next bedroom. If Debbie had screamed, she would have heard her. I believe my daughter's a hero. I truly do.
In a plea bargain, the prosecution offers to drop the rape charge. They fear that under California law, it won't hold up. Debbie was probably already dead when Fizell molested her. He accepts. In court, Jackie addresses the man who murdered her daughter.
Once again, by taking the easy way out with this plea bargain, you have proved yourself to be the pathetic excuse for a human being that you are. In the final analysis, the day will come when you will have to face not only Debbie, but Almighty God, whose punishment will be swift and just.
Fizell pleads guilty to first-degree murder and burglary. On June 23, 1999, Scott Avery Fizell is sentenced to 31 years in prison. 2 years after Fizell's conviction, Harold Whitlock drives off the road on the Oregon coast after a bout of heavy drinking. His daughter, Angela, will always wonder if it was suicide.
He always felt guilty about that if he had gone home, he could have saved her. And I think that haunted him until he died. My father told me once about the butterfly effect. This idea that a butterfly can brush its wing and cause a hurricane halfway around the world. And I think that's what he believed had happened to him, that in that moment of deciding where to spend the rest of the night, he created a hurricane that caught everybody up in it, that killed Debbie, that devastated our family, that devastated his life.
I just wish that I could have solved this case sooner and not put Jackie through what she was put through.
They thought I was obsessed. Don't listen to people. Do what's right for the person you've lost, because nobody else is important.